So as we begin to think about changing human behaviour to solve challenges in the world around us, we also need to look, as we began to this morning, at the inner dimensions of change. And for this, I'm delighted to introduce Rosie Bell, one of the authors of The Systems Within, which is part of the Club of Rome's Earth for All project, which advocates for the psychological, social and spiritual dimensions of sustainability and systems transformation, which has to also be a key part of what we've just been talking about. So welcome, Rosie. Thank you.
So thank you, Susan. So yeah, I'm very honoured to be invited to talk about an essay that was commissioned by the Club of Rome. And it was written with Jamie Bristow, who you'll hear from in a moment, and along with Thomas Björkman, Otto Scharmer, Christine Wamsler, Phoebe Tickell, and Julia Kim. And it's called The System Within, Addressing the Inner Dimensions of Sustainability and System Transformation. So in the briefest terms, this essay highlights some of the important ways that the human inner world, so our mindsets, psychologies, cultures, are producing our systemic crises, and how endemic neglect of these inner factors is getting in the way of solutions, and how the cultivation of our inner capacities could help us transform self and systems. So it's written for an audience that's broadly unaccustomed to integrating inner with outer in systems thinking, to give them some language to use and really quite a basic on-ramp to the field. So I realise for the most part that that's not this audience, so I won't walk you through the content, but I'll just give an overview that hopefully can be useful to you in your own work, whether that's advocacy or field building or whatever it is that you do. A little background. So in 1972, the Club of Rome published its now famous Limits to Growth report, with the first ever advanced computer modelling of climate impacts. And as I'm sure you all know, its conclusions were very clear. It said, we've done the math, and you just can't have infinite economic growth on a finite planet. And here's what's going to happen if we try. Our systems will overshoot the Earth's capacity to support them, and they will collapse. So 50 years later, the Club of Rome produced another report, Earth for All, again with state-of-the-art computer modelling, that said, well, we carried on extracting and consuming and growing, and we are now overshooting our planetary boundaries. And we need a giant leap now in system change to prevent collapse and to get to a sustainable and just global society. And here are the policy levers that we now need to pull very urgently in order to get there. And so they talk about 5 extraordinary turnarounds, and those are in food systems and energy systems, as well as transforming poverty, inequality, and empowerment of women. So Earth for All is a very high-level overview of policy priorities, and authors like us were then invited to contribute sort of deeper analysis in our own areas. But it's very striking that the original report doesn't deal with the inner factors at all. And this is emblematic, really, of a wider lack of consideration in the mainstream field of system change of these psychological, the cultural, and the inner factors that create and maintain our crises. And this problem goes all the way to the cultural roots of how globalized modern society conceives reality. So in materially focused cultures, we treat the inner world as if it isn't part of the real world. And when it comes to climate, we conduct our studies and hold our summits, and we formulate our problems and develop our policy solutions. And we do all of this without considering really the mindsets and values and the blind spots that got us here in the first place. And then we keep failing to implement the solutions that we've agreed on within our institutions, because again, in mainstream institutional thinking, we haven't considered the psychological and cultural barriers to collective action, or the inner capacities that could unlock our collaboration and our sense making and patience and love, like we talked about earlier, and all the skills that we need to get there. Now, I should say here that we don't mean to imply that the inner dimension of sustainability is something new that we've just stumbled across. Of course, it's always present. And the problem is that most of the time in those sort of mainstream areas that are responsible for getting things done, we're not looking at it. And most of the work in this area is heavily indebted to Indigenous and traditional knowledge that's grounded in a more integrated understanding of interdependencies that include the inner world. But this essay we felt was an important chance to introduce inner-led thinking to an audience that's trapped in some ways in externally focused system solutions. So in a very complex territory, we've offered hopefully an accessible introduction that gives system thinkers and policymakers some evidence-based language for this area. So we look at inner factors in two broad categories. So first, we look at what we've called systems of meaning and their role in shaping structures of society and behavior. So these are the deep cultural narratives that sort of shape our experience and guide our actions. So from beliefs and values to cultural paradigms and mindsets, structures of identity and religion, and so on. And this kind of thinking was very much present in the Club of Rome's earlier work. So Donella Meadows, who introduced the idea of leverage points in systems, described shifting mindsets as the deepest leverage point for system change. And then in contrast to these maybe more abstract systems of meaning, we introduce also what we've called states, traits, and capacities. So states of mind and body and more enduring psychological traits and tendencies that drive individual and collective behavior. And related to those, some of the transformative capacities of heart and mind that we can cultivate to support resilience and collective action, and also potentially help shift those more foundational attitudes over time. And finally, the paper introduces some existing and emerging inner-outer approaches to system change. So from mindset shift interventions like Theory U and imagination, activism, to even Ubuntu ethics and contemplative frameworks, to well-being economics and the inner development goals framework. So yeah, just returning to the language of Earth for All, the paper sort of concludes with a call to action, hoping that system change approaches will adopt a sixth extraordinary turnaround, and that's a turn to include the inner in system thinking and discourse and strategies, because without integrating the inner, we will simply never be addressing the whole story or tackling the root of dysfunction in our systems. Thank you very much.
That was truly wonderful. And this really resonates so well with many of the guiding principles at Nova and with our work promoting the inner dimensions of change with Planetary Health Alliance and the Constellation Project. And that really recognises the importance of spirituality for planetary health. So I think it would be wonderful for us all to explore some more collaborations in that space.